Chapter 3. A small gold naked woman. Bruce Austen, captain of the ship Black Fortune, had been introduced to the pirating world at an early age. He was quick in both mind and body, learning fast and mastering all. The crew quickly came to hold him in high regard. On his 19th birthday, his captain, Dane Blythe, announced he would soon be a proud father. It was on that account he decided it was time for him to step down from his reign over the sea. The crew encouraged Austen to take over as captain and rejoiced when he agreed. All these years later, most of that same crew were with him still. During Austen's childhood, Captain Blythe was his idol. In manhood, Dane was his friend. He learned a lot from that man. One lesson being his aversion to born brats, those born into the higher classes, thinking their birthright alone earned them the right to arrogance and tyranny. As his captain used to say, "It just isn't right. It isn't fair. No one deserves arrogance unless they earn it." He would then wink at Austen. "Like we did, eh?" The sentiment held fast with Austen as he grew older, and saw example after example of such born brats and ladies who mistreated those in the lower societal ranks. He didn't understand how people could honestly believe they deserved to have their each and every whim catered to just because they happened to be born into a higher status class with no sacrifice on their part, or even the slightest bit of effort to achieve that status. How could anyone believe that they were simply born better than anyone else? Despite this displeasure, he had to admit, he was attracted to the idea of living among high society. Not all nobility were tyrants, he found. There were many kind and jovial men and women living among the elite, and he rather enjoyed the elegance of it all. With this in mind, he had developed a penchant for schemes that would put him in their company. While there, he would relieve the ones he deemed unworthy of the burdens of their fortunes. He would never go as far as to bankrupt his marks, only lighten their load. He was here in England to conclude one of these exploits. Then he and his crew would soon be back at sea, much wealthier than they were when they had anchored. He stood on the deck of his ship now, scanning the English shoreline, refining his strategy for this visit. Sterling, his first mate, stood next to him, developing a plan of his own. He needed to retrieve a very special item taken from him in his youth. Sterling had spent most of his childhood in England, living with his aunt. Not a sweet old aunt, but a cranky, stuffy one, along with her mousy husband and obnoxious son. He was Sterling's only known cousin, which he found most unfortunate. He left them at the age of 10 to become a pirate and started out as a cabin boy, working his way up through the ranks. He smiled. The idea had come to him one day in this very cove, he mused. He had been playing at the wharf downshore, something not allowed by his aunt, but neither her permission nor her threats of punishment meant much to him. He was a favourite among the harlots at the wharf, and he basked in their attention, a characteristic admired by his 8-year-old peers. One day, when all the women had gone off with real men, he found he had nothing left to do there, yet wasn't looking forward to another fancy dinner with loud, overdressed guests, which was how the rich impressed the rich. While grudgingly making his way off the docks to meet his aunt's wrath, something caught his eye. It was a man looking around suspiciously before heading down a pathway in the woods that Sterling had never noticed before. He waited a few minutes, then quietly followed the man. The path at first was near non-existent. Then 200 yards in, it took form, and following the man became easier. Sterling stayed close on the man's heels for a little less than an hour before the path broke into a clearing. There he found a hidden cove, harbouring a pirate ship. Sterling's jaw dropped. Men adorned with guns and knives hung high above from the rigging, while others laughed raucously as they loaded crates aboard the ship. Sterling marvelled at the huge black cannons lining the decks. "Oi!" Sterling spun around to find a broken-toothed, unshaven mess approaching him. It smiled, and Sterling grinned wildly. "Are you a pirate?" he asked excitedly. The man rubbed his chin. "You likes pirates, laddie?" Sterling's head bobbed up and down. "How old do you have to be a pirate?" The man laughed. "How old are you?" 8. "Not old enough. Come back in 2 years." "Then can I join you?" "Well, it ain't that easy. You have to pass tests. You have to be mean." "I'm mean," Sterling assured him. "And you have to keep a secret." "I can keep a secret." The man crouched down and looked Sterling in the eye. "I should kill ya for finding out about the cove. But I'm gonna let you go, if you promise to never tell a soul. If you do, I'll come after you, and I'll kill ya." Sterling gulped. "I won't ever tell, I swear." The man stood up. "Well, I believes ya, but it'd be my hide on the line here." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small golden statue of a naked woman. "This here is Toller. You gotta keep her with ya at all times. If you ever tell what you saw here, I'll nose it through Toller, and I'll have to kill ya. Or, if Toller ever leaves ya, I'll know that too. Either way, I'll hunt you down, and I'll kill ya. You understand?" Sterling took that statue gently, as if to drop her would mean sudden death. "Now remember what I said. Not a soul. And keep her with ya at all times." "I'll remember." "Now git, and don't let anyone else find ya, or ye be dead for sure." Sterling nodded. "I will come back in 2 years." "Sure you will." Sterling stuck the figurine in his pocket and turned away. "Now don't lose her," the man warned with a nasty grin. "I won't. I promise." The pirate chuckled as he watched the boy rush quietly back down the path. He was happy to pass on Toller to the lad, no longer needing her services, for he had recently secured the affections of a real-life wench. He chuckled, wishing Toller would bring the boy many years of pleasure. Life was great for Sterling for a long period after his daring meeting with the sailor. He waited patiently every day for his 10th birthday. He thought very seriously about his pirating career almost all the time, until that one day his cousin found him talking to Toller, grabbed her from Sterling's hand, and locked her in a safe built into the floor of an unused guest room. Sterling could neither open the safe nor move it. He spent the next 4 days in the guest room, fearing for his life if he left the presence of his small golden captive. He learned quickly that he could leave her for short periods of time to get food, for instance, and even then he checked in all the corners and shadows for murderous pirates coming to kill him. On the 5th day, his aunt began questioning him about his obsession with the old room, and his cousin gladly explained the naked woman figurine to his mother. Sterling was taken from the room, which was locked from that day on. It took Sterling several weeks before he allowed himself to leave the house. He slowly convinced himself that since Toller was taken from him and not deliberately left somewhere, he would be safe without her. Sterling now stood on deck with a smile for that boy. "Home, sweet home," his captain murmured. "Aye, how sweet it is." "Captain?" Austen startled, turning to see his 7-year-old cabin boy Lucas. A proud smile lightened his face. "Aye, Luke." The blonde-haired, blue-eyed boy looked at his feet, shuffling one nervously back and forth. "Since we're in port, I was wondering—" At Austen's raised eyebrow, he corrected. "I was wondering, well, Sams and Green were wondering if they could take me to shore with them." He peeked up through his long blonde hair, innocence in his round blue eyes, and Austen's heart swelled. Outwardly, he shook his head. "I don't know. What do you think, Sterling?" Sterling grinned and cleared his throat. "Well, there are a lot of women in England, but I believe he'll leave us a few." The boy giggled, and Austen laughed, rubbing the boy's head. "Go ahead, but keep an eye on those two for me." The little head arched towards Austen's hand, like a kitten wanting his head stroked. Filled with affection, Austen scooped Luke up and tickled him mercilessly. Lucas lashed out, screaming in high-pitched laughter. Austen threw him high in the air and caught him by his ankles, to leave him thrashing about in a useless struggle. "Help!" Lucas called out, drawing an embarrassingly large crowd of men to the rescue, only to have them all watch with amusement. "It's not funny," he argued, as he swung around while grabbing for Austen's legs. Austen heaved the boy up, catching him at the waist, and safely returned him to his feet. Lucas turned and glared at the men. "Why didn't you save me?" They all laughed, and Lucas turned to find his captain leaning against the rail with a smile, one long leg crossed casually over the other. Suddenly, the young face dropped. Austen tensed. Had he hurt him? Wide-eyed, Luke walked closer to Austen. Austen went to him and knelt before him. "What is it, Luke?" Lucas reached up with wily hands and whirled them through Austen's long curls before he spun away, laughing crazily at his own trickery. Sterling chuckled along with the rest of the men. Austen smiled. All right. Back to work. The men retreated in good humour. "Home, sweet home," his captain murmured. Austen dropped his bag, packed with enough essentials for a few nights on land, onto the spirits table, the pride of his lavishly decorated cabin. He'd spent many nights at this table, first with Captain Blythe, then with Sterling. He'd had some of the best intellectual conversations of his life there, and some of his most heated arguments. He'd kept the bunk, the mahogany desk, and the cabinets where they'd been fixed when he moved in after becoming captain. Saving all the books Captain Blythe left him, he added a few shelves of his own over the years. There was also a small stove now, for he liked strong coffee at all times of the day, a habit he picked up on a visit to Germany many years ago. The cabinet to hold all the rums, ales, wines, and brandies he collected from around the world was also added when he took over the cabin. Tucked away in the far back corner of the cabin was an unexpected bathtub with brass legs in the shape of a lion's paws. It was a present found aboard after departing France one trip. Austen had instantly recognised it as the one he'd so often shared with Leela, a very intimate friend who ran the most expensive House of Desires in France. After 3 long years, he was still uncomfortable with the idea that a woman had been on board his ship. It was considered bad luck for a woman to step foot on a ship, and Captain Austen adhered to the superstition adamantly. In fact, it had taken him 6 months to give his thanks for the gift, along with yet another scolding for her recklessness. Austen reached into an elaborately carved box on his desk and withdrew a cinnamon stick. Then, grabbing his bag, glanced over to the bathtub with a smile. They would port in France next, where Leela would be, waiting and wanting. This was the name she signed on all her correspondence to him. The memory of Leela's practiced abilities always stirred his blood and brought a burden to his breeches. The hidden path led them from the cove where they set anchor to a clearing a short distance from town. The streets bustled with people, and the smell of horses hung thick in the air. "Here we are," Austen announced as he stopped. The roaring rose. 3 brightly dressed women stepped out into the fading daylight. They stopped to blink widely at the men before them. Sterling, delighted with the reaction, bowed gallantly. "Ladies?" They each smiled, curtsied, and stuttered, not all in that order, making them appear to be an unrehearsed dance hall act, bobbing and tittering as the men passed them by entering the establishment. They were feeling good, relaxed to be on solid ground once again as they found a table. It added to their well-being when an invitingly seductive voice greeted them. Austen cocked his head to see a familiar dark-haired, dark-skinned, buxom woman wearing a very daringly low-cut gown, barely concealing her full breasts. "Donella," he answered in a deep voice, but she bent down to brush her lips over his. Sterling's breath caught in his throat as the woman's breasts threatened to spill out onto the table. Her lips played with Austen's before she began a long, slow kiss. But as he extended a tanned hand to her waist, she smoothly rose out of reach. "Where have you been, my mischievous man?" "I have been sailing the mischievous seas, of course." "From what I hear, they certainly have been. You have made quite a reputation for yourself." "Business is business." "Austen, the notorious pirate. Now that doesn't sound like the kitten I know." Austen purred as Donella ran 2 fingers down his neck to his chest. "Sterling?" she acknowledged with a provocative smile. "Still dancing?" Austen asked, remembering the first time they met. She had been a well-known performer, attracting large audiences wherever she danced. "Not professionally," she cooed, her hand sliding deeper beneath his shirt. "But would you care for a private show?" Her tongue ran over her full red lips. He looked to Sterling with a grin and a wink, then headed towards the familiar room upstairs. The beautiful woman followed happily, silently boasting her prize. Sterling's smile transformed into a devilish grin when the realization came to him again. He was home. The time had come to retrieve Toller. He thought of his aunt's house, the one he'd grown up in. In his mind, he followed the path he had not thought about in years, from the front door, up the stairs, to that empty guest room. He would have to sneak in late at night while his relatives slept, if indeed they still lived in that same house. But more importantly, he wondered if Toller still waited for him in that floor safe. His thoughts went to his cousin, just about his age, and he shook his head slowly, imagining his dear cousin as a grown man. How he would love to meet him again, face to face. What a fool his cousin was. Maybe for the fun of it, he would wake him up while back in the house. "Cousin, 'tis I, Sterling." "Delmont?" Sterling looked up at the man standing next to him, startled to have this man privy to his thoughts. The man quickly apologized. "Oh, excuse me. I thought for a moment that you were an acquaintance of mine." Sterling stared at him, sorting his daydream from reality as the man began to leave. "Excuse me, who have you mistaken me for?" The man cleared his throat. "I am sorry. It must be the dim light. You don't resemble him at all, just the mannerisms, I suppose. A business associate of mine. Delmont Brent." Sterling grinned. 20 years of separation, and his fool cousin couldn't even develop mannerisms of his own. "Brent. The name is familiar," he said dramatically, seeming to be searching his memory. "Yes, you have probably heard of his impending marriage. It is in all the papers." "Yes, that must be it. Though I can't recall the lucky woman, the Vendant heiress," the man offered generously. "Saturday's costume ball seems to have all of England afire with its preparations." "That's it," Sterling agreed with a nod. "Are you attending?" Yes, I am." It was suddenly awkward for the man, for it was obvious Sterling had not been invited. "Well, have a time for yourself," Sterling offered. The man smiled politely before taking his leave. This was perfect, Sterling thought. He needed a plan. For a brief moment, he felt childish, but that was before he thought of introducing Toller to Austen back on board the ship and recounting his adventure, and this brought a delighted grin to his face. 3 fashionably dressed young society men, well into their cups, staggered towards him, interrupting his train of thought. One of the men dropped into a seat at the table behind Sterling, while another raised his arm to no one in particular. "Another bottle?" Picking up his glass and reaching protectively for his own bottle, Sterling looked about for a quieter section of the room to resume forming his rescue plan that was stopped by the conversation behind him. "I really wanted to be the first to bed her." Sterling's eyebrows rose, and he reclined in his chair with a growing smile. "We all did," another voice comforted. Sterling nodded. A natural response, he thought. But I was so close. Damn, I would have duelled for her. Sterling heard the clinking of glasses and the bottles behind him. You never would have bedded her. You never even kissed her. The men at the table laughed, but he still insisted. One more night with her. That's all I needed. And a title, teased a deep voice. The first man snorted. A title? Look, what she's stuck with. That pompous fool Brent doesn't know what he's getting. Such a waste of a beautiful woman. Sterling's head cocked, and he leaned back closer to the conversation. Another clinking of glasses. Loughton, she's spoken for. Forget her. Sterling spun in his chair and came face to face with Christopher Loughton. The blonde-haired man blinked drunkenly at the pirate. I wanted her. You know? Sterling's face grew into a wide smile. So I hear, Chris. Chris shook his head and steadied his focus on the man before him, and soon recognition dawned in his green eyes. Sterling's brows creased ever so slightly in warning. Right. Come join me, Sterling invited. In his effort at swiftness, Christopher sent his chair banging to the floor and lost half his glass of brandy to one foot, though none of it went noticed. This is great, he whispered in a very loud voice. Who are you? Sterling chuckled. We just got ashore. You decide. The green eyes looked off into the distance. I'll call you Nicholas. Sterling agreed. Did I hear you mention Brent? Chris leaned back with a thunk. Bastard. What did he do? He stole my girl. Delmont is getting married, and she really is beautiful. What a waste. And I've been courting her for months. She was the sweetest girl I've ever met. The marrying type, you know. When and to whom? Sterling inquired. Julienne Vendant. When? Christopher shrugged. They'll be announcing their engagement at the ball on Sunday. Sterling's eyes sparkled. At the Brents? Yeah. At the costume ball. Chris leaned closer, spying something in Sterling's eye that reminded him of the days of their youth. Nicholas, what are you thinking? I've got to get into that house. Saturday seems like a perfect night now, doesn't it? Christopher laughed and shook his head. You haven't changed. Sterling chuckled in agreement, thinking back on their adventures. Help me out? Course. What can I do? Tapping his glass on the table, Sterling was quiet a moment. All right, the ball is Saturday. It's a costume ball. That should come in handy. You need an invitation, Christopher offered. Do you have one? No, he scoffed. I made my views of the marriage all too clear one night. He grimaced. On the Brents' front lawn. Pissed everywhere. Sterling burst into laughter and held out his glass in salute. Chris added, You won't be getting an invitation from this one. Or anyone in my family, for that matter. There was a silence as both men thought. I really should have an invitation to avoid any unwanted commotion. Unless... Again, Chris leaned closer. What? Tell me. Delmont certainly doesn't need an invitation. Nope. Bastard. And no one would question Delmont's presence in any given room of his own home. Nope. Christopher, do you know Delmont's tailor? The man rested his chin on his hand. Yes. He stared blankly at Sterling. Well, is his regular tailor creating his costume? He nodded in response. Mickner. He's making most of the costumes. Been working on them for months. It's all everyone is talking about. Sterling mumbled as he thought. So, if you were to send word to his tailor that Delmont wanted his costume early? Chris nodded, waiting for more. And we took the costume to Veronica Clare to duplicate it. Is Veronica still around? Yup. Good. Now, if Veronica can make a costume identical to Delmont's for me by Thursday, we could deliver Delmont's original costume to him on time, and I could attend the ball. As Delmont? Sterling held out his hand, and they shook enthusiastically on the idea. That would mean, though, Sterling scowled, we will have to put off sailing until late Saturday night. Austen's not going to like it, but I must stay for that ball. Christopher grinned wildly. What are you doing in England? What adventures are you on? Sterling shook his head. A bank deal, cargo, nothing mysterious. Chris edged forward in his seat. What kind of cargo? Something secret? Sterling watched him with amusement. He knew his reputation preceded him and decided to follow through. He slowly scanned the room and cautiously checked the surrounding tables before leaning nearer his friend. Aboard the ship, we have the ruby crown of the Queen. Christopher's jaw dropped as his chair dumped him backward onto the floor. Sterling roared in laughter at the reaction. Are you serious? The man asked from the floor. Am I ever? Sterling answered cryptically. Christopher straightened himself with a frown. Sterling clapped him on the shoulder. You'll still help me out with my plan, though, won't you? Christopher went to lean his elbow on the table and missed. Of course I will. Is Austen in on this? Sterling sighed. No, Austen can't know anything about it. It's our secret. Austen raised his hand lazily, letting Donella's hair slip between his fingers. He apologized to her silently for his lack of enthusiasm. She didn't seem to notice as she started her warm trail of kisses again. Her lips and tongue trailed sensually over his naked shoulders and chest down to his flat, hard stomach, greedily tasting as much of him as she could, knowing that when he left, it would be a long time before she had this exquisite opportunity again. The late afternoon sun streamed through the window, making shadows dance across the ceiling. He should be getting back to the misty horizon, where he and Sterling were staying for their few days ashore. The faint scent of jasmine and crystal violet eyes interrupted his thoughts yet again. The vision was so clear that he lifted Donella for a moment to assess her face, only to realize it was his mind playing tricks on him. He lay back against the soft pillows and gave his mind permission to wander at will. Instantly, the image of innocently sparkling purple eyes and a mass of black hair sprang forth. Donella softly ran her nails down his calves and over his feet. He smiled, again remembering her distracted voice. My eyes? They are my mother's. He remembered her hair flowing down her sides in the candlelight, her chin tilted just so as she played with her ice. He had wanted her right there at the table. In his mind, he watched again as her long, slim fingers held the silverware to her frozen treat, unaware that she was sliding it back and forth in her dish, mimicking the motion of his own hand. He remembered the race of his blood at the perfection of her delicate wrist. Donella's fingers ran up the inside of his thighs, and his pulse quickened as his mind flew to the picture of Jewel outside the restaurant, looking up at him. Her pink lips parted, innocence shining from her. Innocence hadn't mattered to him in that moment, and he had reached down and taken her into his arms. That's what mattered. She'd smelled of jasmine and tasted of raspberry ice. The memory of the soft coolness of her lips, her body so distinctly feminine against him, teased his senses with disarming intensity. Donella's hands ran over his chest as she nibbled playfully at his hot skin. He remembered the heat of Jewel's hand as it stroked the back of his neck and the trail of her delicate fingers as they ran through his hair. He remembered how his breath caught when she pushed closer to him, a reaction that took him by surprise. Donella slid her body up the length of his, and he again searched her face for violet eyes. Her lips came down on his, and he remembered Jules sweet and eager. Warmth washed over him as he relived the soft curves of Jules' breasts pressing against his chest. He wrapped his arms around Danella's naked back. She arched to let his hands become lost in her hair. He did so thinking of Jewel. He closed his eyes to better remember the feel of Jewel pressing against him. Danella's feet parted his legs beneath hers as his hands held her hips firmly. He thought of the hips beneath peach satin. He imagined Jewel's long, soft throat arched above him, framed by her flowing black hair, and his breathing deepened. He abruptly sat up, bringing his lips to Danella's to kiss her deeply, urgently. She moaned and wrapped her long legs around his strong back, clenching him to her. Smoothly and swiftly he spun her beneath him, the memory of raspberry ice on his lips.